Hey, it's Dre Griggs. Welcome to another Thursday together. Retirement Readiness Thursday. Quick question. Have you ever had a business idea or an idea that you're like, oh, this is the next big thing? This is going to make a lot of money. And it just like fizzled. It just kind of came and it went. Like someone who invested a ton of money in HD CDs, and you found out that someone else invested a ton of money in Blu-ray DVDs, and they're both out at the same time. And when we have these different situations, the market decides. It decides what is most valuable, what we can use to make money. And because we've discussed and we talked about the idea that 65% of self-made millionaires have at least three streams of income, that for me, when it comes to retirement planning, I have found that ensuring that you have enough money, because the number one fear that people have is running out of money. Right? That's the number one fear. So then we have to sit there and decide, all right, how do I create these different streams of income? And there are seven of them that the IRS says that they recognize. And then we normally would choose the three that make the most sense for you. Depending on your age, we can include earned income. We can include pension and Social Security if it's a little bit later in age. And then we normally decide what the other streams are that make the most sense for us, how active we want to be, how much we want to do. For those that are interested in working, where they like interacting with people, they like they have skills and talents that they feel would just be a waste to not use anymore. Where they are in their mind, they're like, I don't want to just sit around, but I'm not too big on the leisurely. I like to work in some facet. We normally would then start looking at, all right, well, what can we do to create a side hustle? Whether that side hustle is consulting or actually purchasing a business or what that looks like. How do I decide that my skills are good enough to make money in the market? And that's what we're going to discuss today because I love economics. I love geeking out on it. I think that we can answer most questions with that. In fact, when things don't make sense, I have found more times than not, if you follow the economics of it, it makes a lot more sense when you follow the money, as we have always said. So I'm going to take a moment and we'll talk a little bit about supply and demand, how we would decide what makes the overall most sense for us. And then from there, we can start really getting into some of these questions as far as how do I, as a person, decide what makes the most sense for me as far as my business. So first and foremost, I know you all have seen our good old friend, supply and demand, right? So we have supply and demand, and then we normally have the price up here, and they normally have the quantity down here. We know high level that there's a couple of rules when it comes to us in entrepreneurship, right? Those that are supplying, the suppliers, the law of supply is the higher the price, the more, well, we'll say the greater, what to say. Well, actually, we'll get rid of that. But the more I'm willing to supply. And if you just went through Black Friday, you are well aware that there are things that when the price is high, there's a bunch of them on the shelf. And when the price is low, there's not that many of them on the shelf. Right. So as far as just that, it's like the higher the price, the more supply. That is the law of supply. Now you'll notice the demand, it actually goes in the opposite direction. So then you'll be sitting there saying, all right, well, what's the law of demand? And I'm like, hey, I'm glad that you asked. So the law of demand is the lower the price, the more I'll buy. And so we have these conflicting goals where if you are trying to solve someone's problem, they want to have the problem solved for the lowest price possible, just generally speaking. And then if you are an entrepreneur supplying a solution, then you want to make the most for that problem that you're solving, right? Of course, economically speaking. We then decide what makes the right price based on how much work we're looking to have. So there is a certain quantity and then there is a certain price that works for, and then you get to test it in the market, right? So I'm going to go through a handful of ways that you can test your ideas to see if your side hustle makes the most sense. But we have to start by recognizing that there is just human nature, human conditions, the way that you and I solve most things, that there are factors that change things. So we know if we charge a high price, right? So let's say that there was a much higher price. We know that there will be more people interested in selling at that price, right? Supply, selling at that price, than there would be people willing to pay that price on the demand, right? So these are people willing to pay that $15 an hour. that means that we would end up with a surplus. And you and I, there are businesses that exist, markets that exist, where we see it seems like there's a whole lot of people trying to make the same amount of money in the same industry because there is a large ability to make money in there. But because so many people have joined that market, that side hustle, it removes the ability for us to make money. That there'll be some people making money and a lot of people not making anything. Like drop shipping would probably be an example of that. Everybody was talking about drop shipping for a handful of years, and yes, there are people making good money in drop shipping, but because there are so many people now in that industry, we have a surplus. They were charging a lot, they're making a great profit, but the people aren't willing to pay that much. So, you know, with a surplus, there's a gap in the amount that we're supplying and the benefit that we're giving. On the other end, it's also true that if we charge too low of a price, that we're almost leaving money on the table. That you and I only have so much time that's available for our side hustle or our consulting firm or whatever it is that we would like to do for an additional stream of income. Whether that additional stream is while we're still working or in our retirement, because we want to have certain engagement in activities. Well, you can see at the lowest price, the supply is on the lower end. There's not that many people willing to supply at that lower price. But you can see the demand is super high. Everybody's willing to buy it at that price. So we end up with a shortage. And that can happen to us. We can have a shortage of inventory, shortage of supplies that if we are charging too low of a price, everybody buys our stuff off the shelf and we're always selling out. And we just can't figure out why it is that we're working so hard, we're selling all the products, and yet we're not generating enough of an income to be able to maintain our retirement, right? If this is one of your retirement income streams. So we have to figure out what the market is ultimately going to take, and that does vary. Without getting too crazy with you, I'll give you a handful of examples, but we know that there are certain things that people will pay a lot for, they won't think twice about, and there's certain things that we won't pay 1 cent more. That the price change just 1 cent, that you and I would immediately say, well, I don't want to buy that anymore. And we know that that's going to be tied to how valuable and how important and how necessary the problem is. That you and I are in the business of problem solving. And we can have a problem of like my kids, they're like, I like my pancakes, but I don't want my pancakes to be, you know, plain pancakes. So they want to have some flavor in their pancakes. That is a problem that they have. They would like to solve that with syrup or honey. If the price of syrup is too high, I don't think they have an issue using honey. They prefer syrup, but I don't think they have an issue using honey. So we find that syrup and honey are, relatively speaking, close to the same price because there is not this ability to really stick it to the market because you'll just be replaced with a substitute, right? That's true in entrepreneurship. That's true in all things that if it's something that's easily replaceable, people will. So we have to keep that in mind when we're making these overall decisions. And like I said, I'll give you a nice table, 5 quick questions that I will normally ask that help me decide whether the market is good to enter in, right? As someone who has started a variety of different businesses, I haven't had much success early on. I've tried many different things where either I was really busy but I wasn't making anything, or I was not busy at all. But when I did have opportunities, I made something that was good, but it wasn't enough on an overall monthly basis, right? So you may have some friends that are real estate agents where they make good money. It's feast or famine, but they're not busy enough to maintain their overall lifestyle. So they might do that on the side or something like that. And so we see that there's this spectrum. I would say from all the different times and different businesses I've tried, one of the ones that was very close to working as far as my time and how much I was making, I had a photo booth business. That was probably the first one that was like my real business. I remember when I was trying to figure out how am I going to create this additional stream of income so that we can like pay our bills. We're having, I don't know, maybe our second or third child at the time. And I was like, I got to figure out something that can let me work on the weekend so I can keep my 9 to 5 during the week job. And then it doesn't take too much time. It doesn't have too much capital that's required to get started. And so I was looking at different businesses. It was a few months that I went by. And when I had stumbled across someone selling a photo booth business, they're selling it for maybe $60,000 or something like that. And I remember thinking, well, it's not that this book of business is guaranteed that you may have did someone's sweet 16 and they're not going to come back. You may be like, hey, I have this book of business. Or I may have did someone's wedding. And again, they're probably not going to come back, especially if they just get married once. And so I was like, I don't know if I need that book of business. So all I really need is to find someone to make a photo booth. And I did. And I had gotten out a loan. It was definitely a very expensive loan. It was like a payday loan. But the reason I had taken it out is because they were the only ones that would approve me for like $25,000. And in my mind, I was like, this is going to work. I'm going to charge. I was looking at the rates. It's like $100, $200 an hour. I was like, I'll do this every weekend. I'll do a couple of events and then I'll pay them back before the year is over. So it won't even be a problem. And that was pretty much exactly how that plan ended up going. But you can see sort of the thought process. I had to find something that was going to generate a certain amount of money, but matching the time that I had, and then the skill set and the cost and things like that. Being in the industry of weddings, a lot of people have a huge wedding budget, and photo booths aren't a big part of the budget. So sometimes people have them, sometimes they will call you and add them on later on. But as far as the list of things you're spending in a wedding, the photo booth is relatively a low cost and it gives a high value. People end up with a picture that they could take, the strip, and then they have these memories that they can keep an eye on and share. And it's almost like you're giving a party favor out without having to actually create these party favors. And it's actually very personalized. So people enjoyed it a lot. And then people had a lot of fun and I got great reviews and it worked. So that was like my first one that was very close to matching out. Naturally, in financial planning, it works, but it took a lot longer. I'm a certified financial planner, working on my enrolled agent, getting a tax certification, and I have a bachelor's and master's in economics. So it took a lot of time. And I've been in the financial industry for about 15 years. So that one it took a little bit longer, but the return matches as well, right? Because now I'm providing a solution to a problem that really does cost a lot of money, right? Like the idea of your retirement, your financial freedom, the paying taxes and limiting your tax exposure, not making sure you don't lose your money in the market, things like that. There's already an inherent value, right? So when we're solving problems, I guess what I'm saying is we know that the value that we create is tied to how big of a problem it is that we solve and how big and how much that matters to the person. And so there is people. So if I talk to someone in their 20s, retirement's not that big of a deal. They understand the idea of retirement, but it's not that big of a deal. It's not a big problem for them. If I talk to someone in their 40s, they can feel it a little bit more, right? But if I talk to someone in their 50s, they're really thinking about it. If I talk to someone in their 60s, it's knocking on the door. So we know that there are certain times in our life that things become a bigger thing. And so what I'll do is I will share with you one of those matrices that we could use where you just want to figure out, does it make sense for me to enter that industry with my side hustle, right? Because we know that there's supply and demand. We know that you want to make sure it's the right price so that way you sell out the exact number of items. And you want to make sure that you generate a certain revenue that matches your time, because we all have limited time. There's only so many people that you can service. So there's no benefit in you charging such a low price, but you can only, like if you're a teacher and you want a tutor on the side and you're a phenomenal tutor that gets everybody passing the SATs, there's only so many hours in a day. You can only help so many people. So you have to charge a price, or not have to, you should charge a price where the exact number of people that you want to serve can say yes. You don't want, there is no benefit for you to charge too low a price that you're booked solid, but there's people who would have paid more and they would have, you don't want to charge too high of a price that now you're sitting around twiddling your fingers either and doing nothing, right? So it's a magic number, and we'll go through a handful of those so we can ultimately decide. So when you're looking at the matrix and the way it would work, we normally would have our supply and demand matrix. So we'll normally have, and I'll scroll down a little bit. So normally have it like this. We'll have our supply on this side. We'll have our demand on this side. We have our low, and our high, and our high. And so when we are looking and we're trying to figure this out, if we have a low demand and a low supply, right, that's pretty much runaway, right? Like that's hard to sell. That would be difficult for us to be able to make a footprint in that market. If we're able to have a high demand and a low supply where we're not competing with a lot of businesses, that is normally going to be the sweet spot. And if you could think of it, it would almost be like if you had a gas station, right? So we've seen gas stations where there's four of them on one on each corner, and each of those gas stations, generally speaking, will charge a little bit less because you know you could just go across the street. But if you ever driven through some country roads, then there's like one gas station, and everybody knows that there may not be another one for a while, and they typically have a higher price for their gas because they know that there is not a large supply of gas stations available for you. If we have a high demand and a high supply, that is a competitive market. And it just depends how interested you are in battling. That there are, think of it almost like buying ads, that we know that there are certain ads that would cost a lot more, and we know that there's some that wouldn't really cost anything at all. But it depends on how the search volume, like how interested are people in these things. And then if there is a high supply, so a lot of people in it, and there's a low demand, nobody buying, we normally avoid those. We normally avoid those. And so that would be things like drop shipping, where everybody was joining in there, made it feel like it was super easy. Everybody was excited to go in that industry. And then we recognized very, very quickly that that wasn't going to work, that didn't match anymore. For us to get in the sweet spot of having a high demand, so if you're talking about, hey, my side income, and remember, when you're talking about income streams, there's really three asset classes that we invest in, and it normally ends up being your homes. So you're either buying homes, you're in the stock market, or you're in a business. And it's probably going to be your business, or you invest as a silent partner of someone else's business. And so we're focusing today on the businesses, but this one will be like you starting it yourself. If you were someone that was interested in generating that third stream of income, if I said, hey, what's a high demand, high supply, we could say that that's maybe like fitness coaches, like trainers at the gym and things like that. If I said, what is a high demand and maybe a low supply, that would be a specialization of some kind. So maybe there's a bunch of fitness trainers, but maybe you are one that specializes in people that have just had an ACL surgery. Or maybe you're one that specializes in people that are 55 plus. Or maybe you specialize in some way where it's like, okay, I'm separating myself from the group. And that's what most of the time we end up having to do. What is my specialty and my specializations? And then if you have a low demand, low supply, then we probably niche down a little bit too much. And that would be something that is not as interesting anymore. And there's actually a pretty cool one I'd seen where someone still sells those washboards. Remember those little boards where you'd wash your clothes before the washing machine was invented? They don't make a lot of them and they don't sell a lot of them, but it's all theirs. No one else does either. Now, people I think play it for musical instruments or for decoration, where it's just you're remembering the old times. People aren't really washing their clothes in the United States with washboards, but it is one of those industries that exist, a low demand and a low supply. And then if you have a low demand, high supply, that's normally going to be the fads, things that we see on TV. And because we see them on TV or people are talking about them online, then everybody is super excited about that. Really, when you're talking about the idea of us building these income streams, we're really going to focus on solving problems. And you can see that these solve really big problems. So the reason that these make us the most as far as the income streams, you can see homes, we need shelter. Can't really get more important than shelter. That I would pay for my mortgage before I pay for the electric bill. I pay for my electric bill before I filled up my car with gas. I pay for food before I would fill up my car with gas. Right? We have a certain hierarchy of things. Right? Hopefully, you don't have to make those decisions, but we recognize that there is an order of things. Shelter is super high on the list. If you're providing someone a roof over their head, that is something that's very important to them, and people are willing to trade their money for that. The money is great, it's fine and dandy, but it doesn't protect me from the rain. There are certain things that we're going to spend our money on and be happy to make that trade. The stock market, the reason that one works very well is because businesses need funding. And if you provide the funding for businesses and they're able to turn that money into a trillion-dollar company, a multi-billion-dollar company, then you get a return on your investment. Think Shark Tank. Those people were going on that show because they believe that they had a great business idea. And if you're able to help someone make a lot of money, you better believe that you're going to receive money for that investment. And then your own personal business, that one works depending on what you choose, but you can see how the idea is here. You need to solve an important problem. That we're going to maintain that same idea. We're going to solve an important problem. And if we do, people will be happy to make that trade-off. At the end of the day, all economics is us trading our time and our money for things that we believe are worth that trade at different parts of our life. And at certain times of our life, we'll make certain trades, and at certain times of our life, we won't make that exact same trade. And that's okay. That our preferences change. And so we are going to adjust whatever we end up selling. When you're trying to figure things out, it depends how important the thing is for them. If someone was dealing with, I mean, really being things. So mine is pretty straightforward, right? Like I get paid to help you make money. So it's a very direct relationship. I get paid to help you not make mistakes. I get paid so you don't have to fear running out of money, have peace of mind. It's a very direct results understanding. But if someone was trying to help the kid go to college, right, what is that worth? If the parent wants their kid to go to college, what is that worth? And you've seen that there was a handful of families that went to jail for bribing people to help their kids go to Ivy League schools. So I guess it's worth a lot. then so that would be a problem that people are very interested in having solved, because in their mind, they're like, if my kid goes to school, they're going to be able to get a job, and they're going to be able to live the rest of their life, and it's going to be great. So it is worth this investment in the short term. So if you're right, if you're a teacher or you have certain skill sets that help them to get into that school, people are going to be willing to pay for that. And we find that to be the case. If you've been injured and you're trying to be healed, right? So I have been training for my marathon, as you all know, and that is not this Saturday, but it's next Saturday. And as I've been running more, my cardiovascular, my VO2 score has been going up, and I'm almost that good, right? So I was at bad, and then I was at fair, and I'm like almost at the top end of fair. Then I'm gonna be a good, and then I'm gonna keep going to excellent. But my time hasn't been going down that much. And I don't know if you know, I had ruptured my patella tendon a while ago. And apparently, I have been walking in a way where I have been offsetting the fact that one of my legs isn't quite as strong as the other leg, where I must have just ever so slightly adjusted the way I walked, where I wasn't putting the same pressure on it. And they say we just do that on our own. But when you run, it's a 1 foot at a time exercise, right? Because if you put both feet down, you're hopping. So if you put 1 foot down, you're running. And then I realized that one of my feet wasn't as strong as the other one, where I was losing the momentum. It was like I would step with my left leg and all of the momentum would slide away. So it was almost like I was braking and then having to use even more energy to restart myself on every other step. So I have been spending a ton of time working on strengthening my left leg. And I've definitely considered, I've gone to physical therapy before. It just happens to be at a point in time right now where I'm pretty motivated. So I'm able to do it, and I can do all the exercises myself. But I would totally pay for that. If I failed, if I was unable to get this figured out, I would totally pay for that solution. I would like to be able to run. So that's important to me. We can find certain problems that people want to solve, and all we're doing is solving people's problem for a profit. And so if you have a skill set, and I see people all the time that you have no idea how phenomenally valuable you are as you continue working and building your expertise. There is an African proverb that says every time the elder dies is like a library is burned to the ground, because there's that much wisdom that we have and that much value that we have. And if you do and you're able to turn that into a revenue stream, then you should. So let me go ahead and I will share with you a very quick 10-minute market test. It won't take too long. It'll be like 5 questions that I would ask and think through when I'm choosing whether I want to enter in something. Recognizing that it's not going to be rainbows and skittles when you first get started. You have to learn and adapt and build all these different hats. But if it's something where you're just like, hey, I would like to have an extra $1,000 a month in retirement, that's very doable for a business, right? Like a business to generate an additional $12,000 a year is very doable. And it should be easier to do that stream than it would be for us to invest in the stock market, depending on how much we have. Where the investment in a business to generate $12,000 a year is much lower than the investment in the stock market to generate $12,000 a year, right? If that makes sense, because of the return on your investment. And then real estate is probably on the upper end because you get to leverage your money. So if you're able to have a property that generates $1,000 every single month for you, that would require more than having your own business, but less than the stock market, just as far as upfront capital. And so we would normally think through that. So the five questions I would normally think about when I'm thinking about any income idea, if you think about just purely from an economic perspective, is number one, of course, is are people paying for this? If people are paying for it, that is a great start. If people are not paying for it, then we may want to think twice. I know it's possible that the idea is brand new and nobody's ever thought of it before, which is totally possible. It's more likely that it's not brand new and someone tried it and it just didn't work. And you don't want to be a time suck. You definitely don't want to be a capital suck, because you're trying to get that income stream going, so that way you can either use that and invest in other things to build more income, or you just want to have it as one stream that you use for your overall retirement. Which means that a lot of the times, if you've already had a job and you have certain skill sets inside of your job, by definition, that means that that's something that people would pay for, right? If you were an accountant at a business and then you retire, well, they're just literally paying for an accountant. So we know that that's something people would pay for. If you were a teacher at school, we know people would pay for that as well. Protection. If you were in the military or police, we know that people pay for private security, things like that, because we already are paying for these things. People already pay for them. So we normally will start there, where it's like, are people paying for this? If the answer is yes, then the demand is real. People are willing to, this is a problem that people think is valuable to solve. And then if no, we need to do more research to figure out why. That if people have, right, even skin conditions like eczema and different things, people pay for all sorts of things. But if you literally can't find people giving money for that, then you probably it's probably going to be a longer shot. I don't want to say it's not possible, because every time I see a new business idea where I'm like, I would have never thought that would have worked. I was out Black Friday shopping with my mom and my kids, and we're just kind of walking around the mall because that's what they like to do. And so I walk with them. I like to spend time with my family. And there was this sock store. I was like, socks? And it was only socks. And I'm sitting here doing the math, and I'm like, okay, if you're in the mall, because that's just the way I am. I was thinking time and money, and it drives my wife crazy. Where I'm sitting here and I'm like, okay, well, if you have a sock store, you might just have a whole bunch of different socks, special socks, unique socks. I totally get it. Very, very amazing socks. And then you have this outlet. You're inside the mall. You're probably paying them at least, I would say probably at least $3,000 to $5,000 a month. So if you're here, that means you're at least generating $3,000 to $5,000, or at least you're spending some other money from somewhere else. Hopefully that's not the case. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. Right? I'm just thinking of this, and I'm like, wow, how cool is that? So I always give the caveat that I'm always pleasantly surprised when I see different ideas work. That I do like the idea of following our passions, because it means that we're willing to put in the work to build that income stream. But I do recognize that your passion isn't the only thing, that it is the market that ultimately decides what the value of something is, whether something is worth the money. The second thing I would normally look at is, are people complaining about this? That lets you know how big of a pain point it is. If people are complaining, then that lets us know that it's bothering people, it's stressing people out, they're worried about it, they're thinking about it. Because there's things that annoy us, but there's maybe that doesn't always mean that we will pay for the solution. It just means it annoys us. So people are complaining about this, and I had heard this one idea, and this person had said what they like to do when they have an idea is they would go to Amazon and they find a book around that idea, and then they would go read in the comments what people said. And then people complain about sort of the same thing. Maybe the book didn't mention this or something like that. Then that gave that person the heads up that, hey, all right, people already paid for this book, so I know people will spend money on it. And they're complaining about this thing that either the book didn't solve or the book agitated the pain point, so they were talking about it. But if people are willing to complain about something, and I know it's a fine line, which is why it's not by itself, because people complain about everything. But we are saying that if people have complaints and they're willing to pay for it, then that is a sign that there is a demand for that problem to be solved. And then you can solve it. You can supply that. So number 3 is, could I be better? Right. As they would say on Shark Tank, could I make a better mousetrap? And this is one of those things that we see a lot in business, where I think CarMax. I don't know if you know CarMax. It's like a car dealership, but they took the pain points that people were complaining about, which was, I don't like negotiating because they're always harassing me and they're kind of bothering me, and I feel like I'm getting gypped, like the price isn't fair. And then CarMax said, no problem, we'll solve those problems. We'll make it a better experience for you. So we're going to give you a price on the window, and that's the price you pay. That there is no salesperson getting paid on commission. They get paid a salary, so you don't have to worry about them trying to make money off of you. They make the same amount of money. And it's gonna be like no hassle. We'll get you in and out, and it'll be like an hour or something. We're not gonna have you sit around for a long time doing this dog and pony show. That we see that, right? Could I do it better? Another example of that would be, if you ever been to Wawa, or I think it's Beavers. Is that this? I don't know what the Beaver's name is, and my oldest daughter's probably mad at me because she loves that Beaver. But those are kind of like luxury gas stations where people complain about how awful the bathrooms were. And I think we all know, especially if you have kids and you try to take your kids in there and you're like, don't touch anything. And you're sitting there with your kids, don't touch anything, don't look at anything, it's nasty. And then you try to hold the one kid up and pee, and then you realize the other kid is like out of your eyesight, and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna turn around, they're gonna be touching something. And they are. They're touching something, and we're all dead. They like can't sit in the car now. We're just all devastated. Where bathrooms were really nasty. And so Wawa said, well, what we'll do is we will have immaculate bathrooms. I mean, they're going to be like eat on the floor. Obviously, you wouldn't eat on the bathroom floor, but they're going to be eat on the floor, amazing experience. And then they said, and then when you look at the gas station food, it's like sitting there and, it's been twirling all day and it's all dry and nasty by the end of the day. And they never replaced it. And then Wawa said, we're going to have like a little restaurant almost. We're going to make fresh subs and cook fresh pizzas, and we're going to have fresh food in the gas station. So they said, yeah, we can do it better. This was things people already were spending money on. It was things people were complaining about. And we had the ability to do it better. And it worked for both of them. Super massive, successful companies. And we can scale it down to what we're doing, where people are complaining about a certain experience. Can we solve that experience in a way that removes that pain point? And then of course that leads you into number 4. We're not just chasing the money, but is it do I have the skills? Right. So normally when you're talking about the skills or something like that, it's I need to know if I can realistically make this a better experience. Right. Do I have the skills to realistically make this happen? That we feel really good about things, but if you've ever made a huge change, it is difficult, and you want to be realistic with this. Now, it doesn't mean you can't close the skill gap. That when you really think of wisdom, I talk about sitting wisdom. Wisdom is this ability to have done something, right? So I normally differentiate it because people interchange wisdom with knowledge and understanding, and I'm not someone that feels that the words mean the same thing. So knowledge is like me reading a book. All right, I read the book, boom, I got the recipe. That's knowledge, and a lot of people can read a book and get the knowledge. Understanding is at some point we know that there's more than just what that book said, and there's some small nuances inside of it. And I normally give the example of my grandmother. She used to make peanut butter cookies all the time, and if she gave you the recipe, you're like, thank you, Granny. And then when you cook, you're like, this doesn't taste like your cookies, Granny, you lied to me. And then your Granny's like, oh, it's just love. And you're like, it's not love, love doesn't taste like this. And then your Granny's like, no, it's just love. And at some point you started watching her, and you could see that she kind of put the ingredients out overnight, and then she mixed the liquids and the dry separate. Her oven was a little bit older, so it actually cooks it a little bit slower. And you start recognizing all these small little things, or even that it's a special butter that she uses, a special salt that she uses. It's not just anybody's salt and butter. That you're like, oh, I see. That right, that's understanding. And then you start getting a little bit better. Where at the beginning it was nasty. Where some cookies, I've done it with my kids. We sat there, we made cookies, and we had clumped up the baking soda. So if you took one bite, the cookie was great. You took the next bite, and it tastes like a clump of baking soda, which is very nasty. I don't recommend that for anybody. And then the next time you do it, you get a little bit better. And the next time you do it, you get a little bit better. And then at some point, you've already learned from all of your mistakes. And that is wisdom. Wisdom is the ability to consistently get the results that you want consistently. Right. Knowledge, I read it, boom, I read it. Great. I understand it. How many people can read a book and then open up a restaurant? Right. Like, I read a book on open a restaurant. No, that's not how that works. I watched the video. No, that's not how it works. You're going to make some mistakes along the way. That's understanding. You start realizing, yeah, it's a lot more than what the book said, because you can't just say everything in the book. And then you have the wisdom. You've already made so many mistakes, you don't even think about it anymore, and it's just autopilot. Right. So do I realistically have the skills to make this happen? Yes, no. Do I care right away? Well, if I don't, I need to be realistic about the process and the struggle that I'm going to face in the beginning. And I want to make sure that I'm realistic about that. And so that's why I say that, recognizing that it's totally possible that you can still make magic happen. And then number 5 is going to be, does this stream move me towards the lifestyle I want? So does this match my lifestyle? If you are someone that wants to travel all the time, then you probably don't want to have a brick and mortar business that requires you to sit in there every day. I'm just saying, if you are someone that doesn't like talking to people, then you probably don't want to have probably don't want to have a side hustle where you're consulting and talking to people. If you don't like children, then you shouldn't be tutoring them. And so there's a variety of things that you would need to say, does this actually match the lifestyle I want? Because we're not just chasing the money. There's too much money in the world to just chase the money. I mean, there's literally too much money in the world to just chase it. So we'll normally ask these 5 questions when you're talking about side hustles and whether things make sense. So we normally start with the economics of it, just the regular supply and demand. We then move into how big the problem is. And if the problem is big enough, I know that people are incentivized to have it solved. That when you live in Florida, your AC breaks, that you're going to try to get a deal, but you also are going to have your AC working by the end of that day. You don't have the time to just go without your AC working, especially if it's the summer. And then we would then figure out whether that supply and demand is high or low, that the sweet spot is to have a high demand and a low supply, that normally means that we have great opportunities available. We also know that if there is high demand and high supply, we're okay with that, but we have to know that it's going to be very competitive. Then we're going to be fighting. If there is low demand and high supply, we're just avoiding that. No more get rich quick schemes. That like the I mean I could talk all day on that. No more get rich quick schemes. So we're going to avoid those. And then yeah, if there's low demand, low supply, yeah, it's going to be kind of hard to sell. Right? There's a very special niche group of people that are going to buy it. So right, and so there's like an Amish community, and you have something that you want to sell to the Amish. Sure, I mean, yeah, obviously they have to buy their stuff too, but we also recognize that the supply is probably the supply and the demand is going to make it difficult for you. And then we end with the 5 questions. You can decide how many you think makes the most sense for you. I would probably say if you can get at least 3 yeses on this, then it's probably worth working and exploring for you. Right? So are people paying for this? Are people complaining about it? Could I do it better? Do I have the skills to realistically make that happen? And then how does it impact my lifestyle? Am I still able to have the time? Right. I gave you the example with me in the photo booth. It was like, all right, I needed a job. I have a job. I need the extra income. Okay, well, I need that to be on my weekends. So then I was looking just for business opportunities that I could only do on the weekends or at night. But then I had kids, so I didn't want to work at night at that time. So you have to go through these different things. I'm a pretty decent people person as far as just I enjoy talking to people. It makes me laugh to see people chasing their dreams. And so when people are celebrating something, I'm celebrating with you. Like we're in this together. And I would say that it was definitely something that I felt I could do better just because of the attention to detail that I have. People are definitely paying for it. Where people complain about photo booths, yeah, I mean, people complain about weddings in general. And I will say that depending on how high stakes it is that you're doing, is how much pressure you have to deliver. So I knew for the weddings, I'm doing the photo booth. This is like once, right? This is it. I mean, if we all play our cards right, you're only getting married one time. So that means I need to be there. Everything needs to be working. There's no excuses. The moment is going to be here and gone. It's 4 hours. I got to make this happen. And that could be the case with you helping someone maybe pass an SAT or different things. But you can be like, well, you can take it again. Sure, you can. But you get what I'm saying? That there are certain things that there's a lot more pressure to get that right. And if you are someone that wants to get paid a higher amount, then you recognize the problem is so big that it's a very big deal for them. If someone's having surgery, they want to wake up after they're put under. If someone's saving for retirement, they don't want to run out of money. There are certain things that people pay more for, but then that also puts a higher demand on you as well. And so we're basically like, we accept that. We're cool with that. So for you this week, I will ask of you to choose one income idea. For those of you, as far as we're talking about the 3 income streams, we're talking about having some sort of a business, a side business, consulting. Choose the one for you, run that 10-minute test, and then tell me, right, just tell me if the market is asking for it, right? Take a look at it, see if the market's asking for it. Can you do it better? And then just let me know what that is, and I'll be here rooting for you. As always, I am thankful. Oh, it's such a great time to be with you all. Hope you're all having a great day. For the time that we have together. Until next time, I am Dre Griggs, founder of Obsidian Wisdom. I ask you to stay safe and enjoy life.